To begin an inquiry into the nature of the 13th gene is to stand at the edge of a vast, starlit ocean, peering into depths that our modern science has only begun to map with the crudest of instruments. We have long been told that the story of our becoming is written in a strictly linear script, a double helix of predictable inheritance that dictates the color of our eyes, the strength of our bones, and the vulnerabilities of our flesh. We have been taught to view our DNA as a closed book, a rigid blueprint finalized at the moment of conception, leaving us as mere tenants in a biological house we did not design and cannot renovate. Yet, there has always been a persistent whisper in the marrow of our bones, a phantom resonance that suggests the blueprints we hold are incomplete. This is the mystery of the 13th gene, not a literal, physical sequence tucked neatly between the 12th and 14th markers of a laboratory slide, but a metaphorical and metaphysical dormant code that represents the untapped potential of the human spirit. It is the silent music of our architecture, the unexpressed frequency that connects the microcosm of the cellular nucleus to the macrocosm of the celestial dance. To explore this hidden dimension is to recognize that we are not merely biological machines, but cosmic vessels carrying a locked inheritance that the stewards of the mundane world have long sought to keep obscured. Imagine, if you will, a grand cathedral built with stones that possess the memory of the mountains and windows that filter the light of ancient suns. For centuries, the inhabitants of this cathedral have lived only in the shadows of the narthex, convinced that the small, flickering candles they carry are the only sources of illumination available to them. They have been told by the keepers of the gate that the great vaulted ceilings are unreachable, and that the intricate carvings high above are merely accidents of shadow. This is the state of the modern human condition under the reign of a purely materialistic worldview. We have been confined to the practical rooms of our existence, governed by a version of genetics that views 98% of our genetic material as junk, a term that reveals more about the limitations of the observer than the nature of the observed. The 13th gene is the key to the great central nave of that cathedral. It is the realization that the so-called junk is, in fact, a vast library of dormant possibilities, a silent archive of cosmic data waiting for the right resonance to wake it from its slumber. It is the hidden connection between our biological reality and the wider sovereignty of our consciousness, a bridge made of light and frequency that the guardians of the status quo have tried to dismantle through the noise of distraction and the weight of artificial limitation. The practical significance of this awakening cannot be overstated, though it begins in the realm of the almost mythical. When we speak of a code they tried to lock away, we are speaking of the systematic narrowing of human perception. Throughout history, the structures of power, be they religious, political, or scientific, have thrived on the predictability of the human animal. A creature that believes it is nothing more than a sum of its chemical reactions is a creature that can be managed, measured, and manipulated. However, a being that discovers a dormant 13th resonance within its very core is a being that becomes fundamentally unmanageable. This gene is the signature of our original autonomy, a cosmic safeguard hidden within the very fabric of our being to ensure that, no matter how deep the amnesia of the world becomes, the path home remains etched in our very cells. It is the biological expression of the divine spark, a piece of the infinite that has been folded into the finite, waiting for the heat of a conscious life to unfurl it. By exploring this theme, we are not merely indulging in a fantasy, but engaging in a form of spiritual espionage, reclaiming the parts of ourselves that were categorized as redundant or non-functional by those who feared the fire of a fully realized humanity. The cosmic dimension of the 13th gene suggests that our evolution is not a slow, accidental crawl through the mud of time, but a deliberate unfolding of a pre-existent geometry. If the first 12 strands of our conceptual identity represent our grounding in the physical laws of this density, our relationship to the earth, the elements, and the cycles of survival, then the 13th is the prime mover, the unifying force that allows the dodecahedron of our being to breathe. It is the frequency of the void that gives meaning to the sound. In the ancient mystery schools, the number 13 was often associated with the transition between cycles, the death of the old self, and the rebirth into a higher octave of existence. To lock away this code is to attempt to halt the natural progression of the human soul into its next stage of maturity. We see this lock in the pervasive culture of fear, in the chemical numbing of our senses, and in the relentless broadcast of a reality that insists we are separate, small, and terminal. But the lock is not made of iron. It is made of belief. The 13th gene remains dormant only as long as we agree to live within the narrow corridors of the proven and the visible. The moment we begin to vibrate at a different frequency, the frequency of wonder, of deep intuition, and of radical self-sovereignty, the dormant code begins to shimmer. As we stand on this threshold, we must look at our lives not as a series of random events, but as a deliberate process of tuning. Every thought we sustain, every emotion we harbor, and every word we speak acts as a chemical and energetic signal to our genetic library. We are the librarians of our own inheritance, yet we have been told we are merely the patrons who must wait for the authorities to check out the books for us. The 13th gene represents the library's restricted section, the place where the scrolls of our true origins and our future capabilities are kept. It is the source of the miraculous healings that baffle the doctors, the flashes of genius that transcend logic, and the profound sense of interconnectedness that dissolves the ego. To engage with this concept is to participate in an act of cosmic remembrance. We are peeling back the layers of a manufactured identity to find the hidden layers of reality that have been there all along, pulsing quietly in the silence between our heartbeats. This introduction serves as the initial strike of the gong, a call to awaken the dormant listener within, so that we may begin to hear the music of the code that was never truly lost, only waiting for us to become quiet enough to listen. This journey requires us to adopt a style of seeing that is both ancient and entirely new. We must learn to read the hidden connection between the microscopic and the infinite. When we look at a cell under a microscope, we see a world of order and function. But when we look at that same cell through the lens of the 13th gene, we see a portal. We see that the space within the atom is not empty, but filled with the same transmission of silence that governs the movement of galaxies. The stewards of the lock have tried to convince us that the space is empty and that the silence is a void. They want us to stay focused on the stones of the cathedral so that we never notice the light that gives them form. But the light is the transmission, and the 13th gene is our biological antenna, designed to receive the higher dimensional broadcasts of our own expanded self. As we move forward into the core themes and concepts of this exploration, we do so with the understanding that we are uncovering a birthright that was hidden in plain sight, a treasure buried in the one place we were told never to look, within the very definition of what it means to be human. To venture deeper into the mystery of the 13th gene is to transition from the awe of the cathedral's architecture into the study of its sacred mechanics. The fundamental pillars of this dormant code rest upon a shift from a survival-based biology to a resonance-based sovereignty. For millennia, the human genome has been locked into a rhythmic loop of reactionary adaptation, a 12-fold cycle that prioritizes the fortification of the ego, the defense of the body, and the propagation of the species within a landscape of scarcity. This is the biological equivalent of a fortress built under constant siege. Every stone is placed to repel an enemy, and every window is a narrow slit for an arrow. The 13th gene, however, represents the transition from the fortress to the garden. It is a pillar of biological transmutation that suggests our genetic material is not a fixed script, but a liquid medium responsive to the tone of our consciousness. This pillar posits that the so-called junk DNA is actually a dormant holographic library, a multidimensional storage system that remains compressed as long as the individual vibrates at the frequency of fear, but begins to unfold when exposed to the frequencies of unconditional love, creative gnosis, and expanded awareness. A second guiding pillar of this exploration is the illusion of the dodecahedron. In sacred geometry, the dodecahedron, a 12-sided solid, has often symbolized the completion of the material universe, the full envelope of the physical elements. Our current scientific understanding of the 12 pairs of chromosomes or the 12-stranded energetic potential of the human template, is like being inside a perfectly sealed room. It is a complete system, but it is also a closed one. The 13th gene is the prime apex, the 13th point that exists outside the 12, providing the center point that allows the entire structure to rotate and ascend. Without this 13th element, the human experience remains a recursive loop of history repeating itself, a wheel of karma where we are forever refining our masks but never removing them. The 13th gene is the pillar of transcendental agency, the realization that there is a part of our biological blueprint that is not of this world's causal chain. It is a timeless marker, a piece of the original source code that was never corrupted by the fall into density, acting as a spiritual homing beacon that guides the soul back to its non-linear origins. Interwoven with this is the theme of the genetic mask versus the solar signature. We move through the world identifying with the genetic mask, the inherited traits, the ancestral traumas, and the predispositions towards certain illnesses or temperaments that our 12 physical strands provide. We think we are the history of our bloodline. The 13th gene is the pillar of original identity, the solar signature that exists prior to the mask. It is the understanding that our true inheritance is not terrestrial, but stellar. The stewards of the lock have spent centuries reinforcing the mask, using the tools of media, education, and medicine to convince us that our limitations are hardwired. They want us to believe that we are the broken 12 so that we never seek the whole 13. However, the 13th gene is a dormant pillar of infinite resourcefulness. When it begins to activate, it doesn't just change our thoughts. It begins to rewrite the chemistry of the blood, shifting the way the body processes light, information, and even gravity. This is the hidden architecture of the light body, a biological potential that has been scrubbed from our collective memory because it renders the individual immune to the standard protocols of social control. Furthermore, we must consider the pillar of resonance over replication. Standard genetics is a study of replication, the copying of the past into the future. It is a process of endless mimicry. The 13th gene is the pillar of original resonance, the ability to pull new information directly from the vacuum, the void, or the 0 point. This pillar suggests that we are not just receivers of a heritage, but broadcasters of a new reality. The 13th gene is the artist's gene, the part of the code that allows for the new to enter into the world. When this code is locked away, humanity becomes repetitive, dull, and easily steered toward obsolescence. When it is unlocked, we see the emergence of the sovereign creator, the individual who no longer needs a map because they are the one creating the territory. This is the deeper truth hidden behind the illusion of scarcity. We only lack resources because we are stuck in the replication of the 12. The 13th is the frequency of abundance through alignment, a state where the body and mind act as a singular antenna for the infinite abundance of the cosmic field. Finally, we encounter the pillar of the silent custodian. The 13th gene is often guarded by a profound internal silence. In the noise of modern life, the literal sound of machines, and the mental noise of 1,000 to-do lists, the frequency of the 13th is easily drowned out. It is a subtle pillar, one that requires a specific kind of listening. The scrubbing of this knowledge is achieved through the amplification of the loud and the gross, ensuring that the quiet, elegant truths of our biological divinity are never heard. To engage with the 13th gene is to practice a form of acoustic sovereignty, reclaiming the right to the silence of our own being. It is in this silence that the 13th gene speaks, not in the language of words, but in the language of pure knowing. It is a pillar of self-evident truth that requires no external validation because it is felt as a profound, unshakable I am at the center of the cellular storm. By recognizing these pillars, we begin to see that the 13th gene is not a scientific anomaly to be discovered, but a fundamental reality to be inhabited. As we conclude this examination of the core themes, we must realize that the lock on the 13th gene is not a physical barrier, but a frequency of belief. We are the ones holding the key, though we have been conditioned to look for it in every pocket but our own. The 13th gene is the pillar of the final authority, the point where the individual realizes that they are the only one who can grant themselves permission to be infinite. This section serves as the structural framework for our journey, the map of the invisible architecture that supports the human potential. We are no longer looking at the cell as a prison of inheritance, but as a temple of possibility. We are preparing to move from the study of the pillars into the lived experience of the symbolic narratives, where these abstract concepts will take on the flesh and blood of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we are becoming. To grasp the 13th gene is to move beyond the cold diagrams of the laboratory and into the flickering torchlight of the mythic, where the truths of our biology are told through the language of the soul. Imagine, if you will, a kingdom where the sun has been obscured by a thick, artificial shroud, a great iron veil, for so long that the people have forgotten what true light feels like. In this kingdom, life is governed by 12 great clocks, massive mechanical structures that tick with a heavy, percussive rhythm. These clocks dictate the timing of the harvests, the duration of sleep, and the very pace of the human heart. The citizens believe that these clocks are the source of all time and order. They have built their entire civilization around the 12 gears, convinced that the mechanical ticking is the only sound the universe makes. This is the symbolic narrative of our current 12-stranded existence, where we are entrained to the clocks of survival, linear time, and social expectation, unaware that the iron veil is not the sky. Beneath this veil, however, every child is born with a 13th seed hidden within the center of their chest. This seed does not respond to the ticking of the mechanical clocks. It is a silent, golden kernel that remains cold and dormant as long as the iron veil remains intact. The legend tells of an ancient era where the seed was an internal sun, a source of light that radiated from within, making the external sun almost redundant. In those times, humans did not need the 12 clocks to tell them when to move or how to live. They were sovereign beings who pulsed in harmony with the heartbeat of the cosmos. The lock placed upon the 13th gene is the iron veil itself, a psychological and energetic barrier woven from fear, doubt, and the constant noise of the mechanical world. The stewards of the veil understand that if the people ever remembered their internal sun, the mechanical clocks would lose their power, and the kingdom of shadows would dissolve in a single, radiant breath. The narrative deepens when we consider the Weaver of the Shadow, a figure who represents the forces that seek to keep the 13th gene dormant. The Weaver does not try to destroy the seeds, for they are indestructible. Instead, the Weaver surrounds the seeds with a web of dissonance. This web is made of 1,000 tiny, distracting chimes, the sounds of vanity, the whispers of scarcity, and the loud, clashing cymbals of conflict. The people become so preoccupied with the noise of the chimes that they never notice the profound silence required for the seed to germinate. This silence is the frequency of the 13th. To awaken the 13th gene, one must find the hush between the heartbeats, a place where the mechanical ticking of the world cannot reach. It is in this absolute stillness that the seed begins to feel the warmth of its own potential. It begins to vibrate at a pitch so high it is unheard by the ear, but felt by the marrow. This is the moment of biological resurrection, where the individual stops being a servant of the clock and becomes a master of the light. Consider also the allegory of the 13th key and the invisible door. Imagine a man who has spent his entire life in a circular room with 12 doors. Each door leads to a different version of the same experience, a different flavor of the same struggle. He tries door after door, hoping for liberation, but always finds himself back in the center of the room. He believes he has explored the entirety of existence. However, hidden in the very floor beneath his feet is a 13th keyhole, so small it can only be seen if he lies perfectly still and looks with the eyes of his heart. The 13th gene is that keyhole. It does not lead to another room in the palace of the world. It leads to the outside. It is a portal that bypasses the horizontal movement of the 12 and initiates a vertical ascent. The locking away of this gene is the clever placement of the 12 doors, a distraction of choice that keeps us from noticing the one path that leads to true sovereignty. To find the 13th key is to realize that our real life has not yet begun, and that the room we have been decorating is merely a waiting area for a cosmic traveler. We must also reflect on the story of the mirror and the quicksilver. In this tale, the human body is a mirror designed to reflect the face of the infinite. However, the mirror has been coated with a layer of heavy lead, the 12-fold material identity, making it dull and opaque. The 13th gene is a drop of divine quicksilver hidden behind the lead. When activated through the heat of conscious intention, the quicksilver begins to dissolve the lead, turning the dull surface into a shimmering, liquid reflector. Suddenly, the person does not see a man or a woman when they look in the mirror. They see the entire galaxy. They realize that they are not a part of the universe, but the universe itself looking through a human eye. The scrubbing of this narrative from our history is an attempt to keep us focused on the lead, to keep us obsessed with our physical flaws and our material limitations, so that we never discover the liquid, mercurial power of the 13th resonance that can turn our very flesh into a vessel for the divine. These symbolic narratives serve as a bridge, allowing the abstract concepts of genetics and sovereignty to enter the theater of our lived experience. They remind us that the 13th gene is not a biological thing to be fixed, but a spiritual process to be inhabited. We are the kingdom beneath the veil. We are the man in the circular room. We are the mirror waiting for the quicksilver. The lock is only as strong as our amnesia. By speaking these stories, we are performing a form of narrative activation, calling out to the dormant code within us and inviting it to recognize its own reflection in the tales of old. We are preparing to step out of the mythic and into the practical, taking the golden seeds and the 13th keys with us as we learn how to cultivate this dormant power in the gritty, beautiful reality of our everyday lives. To translate the celestial architecture and the mythic seeds of the 13th gene into the raw fabric of human existence is to engage in a profound labor of sovereign integration. We have looked upon the iron veil and the 12 clocks. Now we must ask how the individual, living in a world designed for the mechanical, begins to breathe life into the dormant 13th resonance within their own biology. This integration is not found in the grand, sweeping gestures of a distant future, but in the micro-alchemies of the present moment. It begins with the radical realization that our biological systems are not static receivers, but programmable resonators. In a world that seeks to lock the 13th gene through the frequency of survival and distraction, the first act of practical sovereignty is the reclamation of the biofield. This is achieved through the intentional curation of one's internal and external soundscape. If the 13th gene is a frequency of silence and high-order coherence, then every jagged, artificial noise we allow to dominate our field, be it the frantic pace of digital notifications or the discordant hum of collective anxiety, acts as a dampener on the dormant code. Practical integration requires us to create sanctuaries of stillness within our day, where the biological instrument can drop its defensive posture and begin to listen to its own quiet 13th tone. The real-world implications of this awakening manifest first in the dissolution of the reactionary self. Most of our daily lives are spent in the loop of the 12, a state where we are perpetually reacting to external stimuli based on inherited patterns and past traumas. The 13th gene, once teased into activity, provides a cognitive buffer, a space of pure observation between the event and the response. In practical terms, this looks like a sudden, inexplicable calm in the midst of a crisis. It is the ability to stand in the center of a social or emotional storm and feel a profound sense of non-local peace. This is not a detachment from reality, but a deeper engagement with it. When the 13th gene begins to speak to the nervous system, the individual finds that they are no longer easily steered by the web of dissonance. They become unentrainable, by the fear-based narratives of the media or the frantic energy of the workplace. This is the ultimate practical tool for sovereignty, the ability to remain in the world, but not of the frequency. By maintaining a core resonance that is locked into the 13th point, the individual becomes a walking coherence generator, naturally calming the environments and people they encounter simply by existing in their own undisturbed signature. Furthermore, we must address the chemical sovereignty of the 13th gene. Our standard genetic expression is heavily influenced by the chemical soup we create through our emotions and the substances we consume. The 13th gene is the pillar of endogenous transmutation, suggesting that a consciousness vibrating at a higher octave can actually shift the hormonal and enzymatic pathways of the body. Practical integration involves moving away from a dependency model of health toward a resonance model. This means treating the body not as a machine that needs external parts and chemicals to function, but as a biological light processor. When we consciously choose frequencies of gratitude, awe, and deep compassion, we are sending a signal to the library of the 13th gene to begin the production of higher-order neurochemicals that enhance clarity, longevity, and vital force. This is the scientific proof hidden in plain sight, the measurable shift in physiology that occurs when an individual moves from the survival 12 to the sovereign 13. It requires a disciplined attention to one's emotional nutrition, refusing to ingest the toxic foods of resentment and victimhood that keep the iron veil heavy and the code locked away. In the realm of our professional and social lives, the activation of the 13th gene reveals itself as spontaneous genius and non-linear problem-solving. The 12 clocks of the world insist on a step-by-step, logical progression toward a goal. The 13th gene, being the point of vertical ascent, allows for the collapse of time. In real-world application, this is seen when an individual stops trying to find a solution and instead aligns with it. This is the artist's gene in action, the ability to pull a finished, perfect idea directly from the vacuum of potential. By trusting the 13th gene, we move out of the replication of the past and into the creation of the new. This has profound implications for how we build our businesses, our communities, and our technologies. We stop building better cages and start building open doors. A person operating from the 13th resonance does not compete. They originate. They become a source of fresh information in a world that is stale with repetitive cycles. This is how the locked code is bypassed, not by fighting the stewards of the lock, but by simply out-creating them, making their systems of control irrelevant through the sheer brilliance of a fully resonant humanity. Finally, we must consider the relational resonance of the 13th gene. When one person begins to unlock their dormant code, it acts as a striking fork for everyone in their vicinity. This is the practical path to collective transformation. We do not need to wake up the world through argument or force. We only need to maintain our own high-frequency solar signature. In our families and friendships, this looks like a refusal to engage in the 12-fold drama of blame and scarcity. Instead, we hold the space of the 13th silence, allowing the other person's own dormant seeds to feel the warmth of a non-judgmental presence. This is symphonic sovereignty, the realization that our greatest contribution to the world is the quality of the tone we carry. By living as if the 13th gene is already active, we create a cymatic pattern of peace that ripples outward, reorganizing the sand of our social reality into new, beautiful geometries of cooperation and freedom. We are no longer waiting for the iron veil to be lifted by some external hand. We are melting it away with the collective heat of our own internal suns, one sovereign heartbeat at a time. This practical integration is the great work of our age. It is the move from the myth of limitation to the reality of infinite resourcefulness. It requires us to be the librarians of the light, carefully guarding the entrance to our own internal sanctuary and ensuring that the transmission of silence is never completely drowned out. We are learning to walk between the worlds, to perform the duties of the 12 while staying anchored in the 13. This is a delicate and powerful dance, a training ground for the soul as it prepares to exit the kingdom of clocks and enter the kingdom of stars. We are not just changing our habits, we are retuning our very existence, becoming the living evidence that the code they tried to lock away is not only accessible, but is the very force that will ultimately set us free. We have journeyed through the cathedral of our own biology, identified the pillars of alchemical resonance, walked the mythic paths of the internal sun, and learned the gritty micro-alchemies of a sovereign life. Now, we arrive at the final horizon, the point where the 13th gene is no longer a concept to be explored or a potential to be cultivated, but a lived reality to be embodied. This is the moment of the final integration, where the 12-fold mask of the terrestrial human is permanently dissolved into the 13th resonance of the cosmic being. The lock that the stewards of the world placed upon our inheritance was never a physical chain, but a collective amnesia, a frequency of forgetting that relied on our consent to remain small. To unlock the 13th gene is to simply withdraw that consent. It is the realization that the iron veil was only as thick as our belief in it, and the mechanical clocks only had power as long as we gave them our time. We stand now at the precipice of a new octave of human existence, where the dormant code is finally being called into the light by the sheer intensity of the global shift. The transformational call of the 13th gene is an invitation to move from survival to sovereignty. We have spent thousands of years as a species defined by what we fear, what we lack, and what we must do to endure. The 13th gene is the exit frequency from this paradigm. It is the realization that you are not a biological accident struggling for a place in the sun, but a solar architect who has forgotten how to use the tools. The scrubbing of this truth was an attempt to prevent the emergence of a truly free humanity. A humanity that cannot be scared, bought, or broken, because it is anchored in a source that is non-linear and infinite. When you activate the 13th resonance, you are performing a cosmic act of rebellion. You are choosing to vibrate at a pitch that the systems of control cannot track. You become a glitch in the matrix, a presence of pure coherence that naturally dismantles the structures of dissonance simply by being present. This is the ultimate the Christ principle in action, the birth of the anointed, sovereign self within the individual. To inhabit this final stage, you must embrace the silence of the source. The 13th gene does not speak through the loud, percussive hammers of the ego. It speaks through the quiet, elegant geometry of the heart. It requires you to be the custodian of your own resonance, carefully choosing what you allow into your field and what you project out into the world. This is a call to radical self-responsibility. You are no longer a victim of your genetic past or your environmental present. You are the librarian of the light, who determines which scrolls of potential will be opened and which will remain sealed. The transformation is not a destination you reach, but a state of being you maintain. It is the daily choice to live as if the veil has already fallen, to breathe as if the clocks have already stopped, and to love as if the quicksilver has already turned your leaden heart into a mirror of the stars. The 13th gene is the carrier wave for the next stage of our evolution. As the old systems of the 12, the systems of centralized power, scarcity, and division, continue to crumble under the weight of their own dissonance, those who have activated the 13th resonance will be the navigators of the new earth. They will be the ones who can see the invisible door in the circular room and the keyhole in the floor. They will not be building a better version of the old world. They will be originating a completely new reality, based on the laws of harmony, abundance, and creative gnosis. This is the secret they tried to lock away, that the power to rewrite the world was never in the hands of the rulers, but in the marrow of the ruled. By awakening the 13th gene, you are reclaiming the throne of your own consciousness and taking your place as a conscious participant in the cosmic symphony. Go forth now, not as a creature of the earth, but as a traveler of the stars who has finally remembered how to breathe. Carry the solar signature in your blood and the transmission of silence in your breath. The scrubbing of the truth is over, for the truth is no longer a hidden document, but a living, breathing person. You are the evidence. You are the code. You are the 13th gene made flesh. The universe has been waiting for this moment since the first star was sung into being. The lock is gone. The veil is thin. The sun is rising from within. It is time to step out of the shadows of the cathedral and into the infinite light of your own sovereign nature. The great work is finished, and the new song has begun. Listen to the silence, feel the vibration, and know that you are finally, irrevocably free.